In this video, we're going to talk about how to troubleshoot a slow matrix or table visual in Power BI. Lots of people like to build matrix visuals. They're very popular with um, their customers, often because somebody's trying to export data. Um, However, it's really easy to put too much content in them and bog them down. And so that's what this video is about, is how to sort of diagnose why a matrix visual turns slow, either because there's too much stuff or the stuff in there is too complex. So we'll talk about that. And we'll just share some techniques to go about identifying the problem. And a lot of the learnings from this will also apply to other troubleshooting other visuals as well. Um, I've been doing a bunch of this in the last couple of weeks, and often I'm asking these three questions. And before you jump straight in, somebody says, "Hey, I've got a slow DAX measure. Help me troubleshoot it." You definitely want to see the model first. Usually, you want to see the report, like, "Hey, show me the problem. Show me what's going on," before you start talking about optimizing DAX. Um, it's great when you're helping a colleague from the same company. They often can share the file or data with you, but sometimes you can't. And so if you are trying to help someone that can't share the data with you, you can still walk them through these steps so they can help themselves and hopefully get unstuck. If these videos are helpful to you, please go ahead and subscribe to the Hoosier BI YouTube channel. All right. So let's talk about why matrix visuals can slow down. And it's usually one or more of these five things. Either it's just, there's a lot of data, or it's a bad model. And if that's the case, usually everything's slow. Often you try to pack too many rows into, and that's probably the number one thing that I see. Often you can also try to put too many columns or too many measures, or a combination of both, in the matrix visual. Then, of course, some of the measures or all the measures could have bad DAX, and that really can slow things down. And sometimes the report page could be too busy. Like if you had a lot of other things on the page, it might take a bunch of time before even the matrix visual starts to render. Usually a matrix visual is sort of the star of the page, and that's usually not the case, but certainly that can happen. And definitely you want to try to speed things up, because that's going to improve your consumer's user experience. And if you're on a premium capacity, it also can save your CPU and prevent throttling for other reports that are on the same capacity. So there's kind of two ways you can go about this. Sometimes you can get there with just the performance analyzer, which we'll talk about, and just add and remove, dimensions and measures, and try to see which is the slow one and how to speed things up. But you can do a much more thorough job by, copying the query over to DAX Studio from Performance Analyzer, usually with the filters in place if it's very slow, just to speed up your troubleshooting. And if you're helping somebody with a published data set that may be too big to download to desktop and capture the queries with Performance Analyzer, you can also connect with the XMLA endpoint and then do the same process we'll talk about here. All right. So this is part one of two videos. In the next video, I'll talk about how to go about fixing or some alternatives to a matrix visual, or things you can do to sort of lessen the load. But in this one, this is all going to be about just diagnosing what the problem is, so you know what type of fix to apply. So just real quick about this model. This is a model of flights data, just on-time reporting for U.S. Carriers and airports, and it's about 5.5 years worth of data. It's a really nice little star schema, so it's a good model. So that's not the issue in the slow matrix. We'll show in a second. And there's about 33 million rows in the fact table. From a citizen developer standpoint, that's a pretty big fact table. From an enterprise data model, that's pretty tiny. So, but again, you can get slow matrix visuals with much smaller fact tables. But obviously, the more volume you get, the more likely you are to run into a performance problem. So let's meet our slow matrix here. And so I've got this matrix visual here. A couple slicers for the carrier and the airport, the date range, and if you click here, you see I've got sort of three dimensions here: the airport, the carrier, and then the actual flight numbers. And then I've got a whole bunch of measures here. So this is a common pattern that I see. You even got to use the scroll bar to see them all. And let me just turn on the performance analyzer. And if I just, at the highest level here, so it's not expanded at all, if I just refresh this visual, let's see how long it takes. So it's pretty slow. This may even be past what your users are willing to wait for. If somebody's exporting data, usually they're willing to wait longer. That took 11 seconds. All right. And it only gets worse from here when you expand it. So to just make things a little better, I live here in Indianapolis, so I'm going to filter to the Indianapolis airport. Okay. And so you see it's quite a bit faster. And now if I click on the visual and expand down a level, that shows us at the airlines that operate out of this airport. And then if I expand again, it'll slow down even more. It took 13 seconds just for one airport. And so part of the problem here before we start jumping into this is, I've got these 3 dimensions, and as I expanded it, it got worse. And so that's a common pattern that I see is people are just trying to put too many rows in this. And if you look up here, I've got some measures up here that, let me just go back up to the top level before I do this. And then if I clear this filter, you'll see these numbers here increase. And, there's 383 airports in the data set. And then I just sort of did the cross join or the summarize over carriers and airports. So 2,300. So already that's a lot. So, but one expansion down, I've already got a lot of rows, and you might not want to scroll through 2,300 rows. But if you expand this all the way down to the flight number, you can see we're trying to render 560,000. And that's crazy. That's way too much. But I've seen people do this. And it's just easy to build the visual, and of course more detail is better. So I'll throw more stuff in there. So that's definitely going to be part of the problem here, is just the number of rows in this thing we're trying to render. Now the visual only show you 500 at a time, and as you scroll down, it'll show more and more and more. But you definitely should avoid this kind of a scenario. So in the next video, we'll talk about how to do that. This one, we're just going to further diagnose what's going on. So we know this is one of our major problems, is there's just too many rows. Okay. The second problem, and I want to go back to Indianapolis Airport. That was cached, so that came up real fast. Is there's just a lot of measures here, right? So if I again highlight this visual again, so you can see we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 measures here, and that's a lot. And again, if maybe somebody's exporting data, they want that, but just the number of things that, even if they're all pretty good measures, or if all of them are a little off, you could get to a performance issue just with the number of things in here. And certainly if I added a field in here, like a month or something as columns, things would get even worse, because just the number of values that I'm trying to determine there just goes up and up. So, all right. So again, you could sit here and play with performance analyzer. You could clear this, and then I could say, hey, which measure is slow? I can pop these in and out. I could, take out a level of detail here and see, and you likely could get to the solution or the steps you need to take to improve this visual. But it's just much easier to do over in DAX Studio. So I'm going to just refresh this visual, and then I'm going to copy the query, and then we're going to hop over to DAX Studio. All right. So if you already have DAX Studio installed and you go to External Tools and click on that, it'll open up DAX Studio already connected to this model. Okay. Okay. And so here I can go and then just paste that query that I just copied. And this is behind every visual with data. There's a DAX query that's going to go off to analysis services to bring you back your data. Now, just as a quick aside, this is connected to the local desktop file. If, say, you're helping somebody troubleshoot a data set on a premium capacity, and so I've also published this same exact model up to a premium capacity, You can also grab the XML endpoint. So if I just click on the settings for the data set, right, and then I go down to the server settings, I can grab this connection string. And with that, then I could go to DAX Studio, oops, and then do connect here. And instead of this one, you do tabular server. And then we paste in that and connect. And then we'll see this shouldn't really change because it's the exact same model published up there, but we'll be connected to the XML endpoint, right? And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to open the report, and I'm just going to move it to my other screen. I'm just going to tell you what I'm doing so we can see what happens here in DAX Studio. Okay, so in this case, I copied this one from the local file with Performance Analyzer. In this case, I'm going to click on All Queries, and with this, I'm just going to monitor all the analysis service queries that are happening on that published data set. So if I, now that that's started, I got my nice red blinking light there. I'm going to go back to the report and go to that visual. And we might start to see things. I'm going to change the slicer. It was set to Orlando. I'm going to go ahead and set that to Indy. And then you start to see queries showed up. I was clicking slicers. That's why one of those was canceled. And so you can see this here. This is likely, so we should basically get the same query back here. So I'll copy that. You get this here, and then you can double click it, and we get the same thing. We've got the Indy slicer, and we've got this stuff. Okay, so this is the same query, or should be the same query that we just had, right? So I'm going to go ahead and shut that off and just go ahead and connect back to the local desktop one, just for simplicity. Okay. And so now we should be able to turn off all queries. I'll turn on query plan and server timings, and we should be able to reproduce what we saw before. So I'm going to go to server timings. I've got clear on run checked here, so it clears the cache before it runs it, which gives you the worst case of what your users might see if they're troubleshooting, hitting a report for the first time. Okay. And with this took 433 milliseconds, 890 milliseconds of storage engine CPU. All right, and so that's similar to what we saw before. Now, usually when you troubleshoot these, this is, I mentioned, the visual will show you 500 at a time. What I like to do, you really don't need this. I'm going to go ahead and delete that part. And in here, you need to return a table, which requires you to have an evaluate. So you put evaluate there. And so it's still defining that filter. It's using that filter in here. That's popping up. And so now we're to the point, if I go ahead and run this, it'll probably take longer because I'm not doing that top end, but I'm still filtered to Indy, took the same, which is good. And so now we can start troubleshooting what's going on here, right? Actually, let me jump back. I forgot to do something first. So notice over here in DAX Studio, right here, it's got basically the airports code because I'm at the top level of that hierarchy, right? So what I want to do is capture the query when I drill all the way down, which is when I really see the problem. So I'm going to pull this back up here. I'm going to make sure Performance Analyzer is turned back on. Then I'm going to drill down once, and then I'm going to drill down again. For 12 seconds. So now if I copy this query and go back to DAX Studio, all right, I'll have to redo some of those steps. When I paste this in here, you'll see that it has the other levels here. So we got the code, we've got the carrier, and then we've got the flight number. Okay. So again, I could refresh that, show you the 12 seconds. I'm going to go ahead and delete down here. It's actually going to be a little slower once I do that. So I guess just trust me on that. But what I'm going to do is start commenting stuff out to try to see what's going on here. And that'll help speed it up here just while we're troubleshooting. So what you like to do is get it like this. Again, I need to replace this variable with an evaluate, right? So that I return a table. And you turn on debug commas, which will take the commas at the end and put them at the front, which makes it really easy then to comment lines in and out while you're troubleshooting. Okay. So what I'm going to do first here is I'm just going to comment out all the measures. Okay. And then just to see like if all these measures return values, um, what would I be looking at in my visual? So I'm going to run that. Okay, it took 3 seconds and I got 138,000 rows. And that's just for Indianapolis, right? So that's a ton of stuff, right? We clearly have a problem here with trying to return too many rows, right? And so what I can also do is comment out this line, okay? And then I can also comment out the filter. So I'm not using that Indianapolis filter. So now it's, if I adjust the flights measure, right, only 2,700. So that's much more reasonable, right? You still probably wouldn't want to scroll through 2,700 rows, but that's more reasonable. And actually, that's an amount that could be exported if somebody really wanted to do that, because the visual is going to limit you to 150,000 anyway, right? Okay, so now things are looking a little more reasonable. That took 162 milliseconds, so that's great performance, right? And so we know we want to take out this level of granularity. So now we're just going to focus on the measures that we have. And so now what you can do is you can comment in like groups of measures at a time, right? So I'll just comment that one out, and then I'll just do like these first three, right? And I'll see how long that one. 195 milliseconds. That's pretty good. So that's not our trouble. Comment those back out. These are talking about delays and flights last the latest month and flights the month before that and the month over month change. So let's uncomment those and see what's going on. Okay. 483 milliseconds. That's still pretty good. Comment those back out. And now we're getting down to the ones that we think are going to be the problem here. So I'm just going to do one at a time. And I obviously know which ones are the really bad ones here. This one, this late 60, let's just run that one. I don't think this one's too bad. 637 milliseconds. So on its own, it's still longer than the other ones that had multiple. So that one probably could be optimized. I'll tell you this one here, the median. I don't even think I'm going to run it because I know medians are slow. Really can't be passed to the storage engine. Maybe if I put the Indianapolis filter back in, I would run the median, but I'm hesitant to run it for the whole data set because it is very slow. And so that's definitely the worst one I know from my prep for this. And then if I look at this one, this peak month, like what was the month where it had the most flights? If I run this one isn't great either. Okay. 9 seconds. Okay. So I've learned some important stuff. So definitely it's too granular. I'm trying to render too many rows in here. I can have a bunch of measures as long as they're all fast, but there are definitely some of these that are slow. So what I would want to do is, comment this one out, comment the median one out, maybe the late 60, but I'll just leave that one in there, and we won't take the filter. Let me leave the filter table commented out so that we're getting everything. So we're getting the code, the airport, the carrier, and then most of our measures, but we're taking out these two really slow ones. And if we run this one, let's see what the performance looks like. Okay, not bad. So 1.1 seconds. That's a huge improvement. If I had everything expanded before with all these measures, the visual would have timed out over the 225 seconds, right? So hopefully this shows you, and like, so we could take that learning back to this matrix now. And so if we click on this and we say, hey, that's too granular, I got to take out that level of detail. And in the next video, we'll talk about how to get that information back to your consumers. And then let's take out this, the median was bad and the peak month was bad. So those are the two we commented out. And then I'm going to go ahead and take off this filter, and let's see how long it took. Okay, so it only took 2 seconds, and 1 second of that was DAX. Or was the DAX query time. So again, hopefully this video shows you the techniques to go about figuring out why your matrix visual is slow. Again, these learnings will apply to other videos. And then look for video 2, where we'll talk about how to still give your consumers that detailed level of information at the flight number level, even though it was too much for this matrix.